Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel on Shifting Tides, How CEOs Navigate Today's Challenges, moderated by Editor-in-Chief of Yahoo Finance, Andy Serwer.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Andy Serwer, Editor-in-Chief of Yahoo Finance, and welcome to this stellar panel. We have an incredible lineup here of super accomplished CEOs who are leading some of the most iconic companies on the planet, and I will introduce them to you right now. On the far left, David Solomon, Goldman Sachs; Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA; Jeff Harmening, CEO of General Mills; to my right, Carmine DeCibio, CEO-elect of EY, July 1st. And then to the far right, Bob Backus, Chief Executive of Viacom. So I think this discussion is really all about how the responsibilities of the chief executives have changed. And if you think about it this way, so traditionally being a CEO, you had 10 Qs, 10 Ks, annual reports, annual meetings, board meetings, operating heads, strategic stuff, a little M&A, then you do some succession, you're gone. And that's all very, very different right now. And I think over the past 5 and 10 years, there's been a whole host of new issues, things like diversity and inclusiveness, sustainability and the environment, privacy, and those types of issues, along, of course, with technology. And I think the point is that while maybe 10 years ago, these were sort of peripheral issues, you'd bring someone in once a quarter to maybe have a little conversation, put something in the annual report. These are all very core issues, and increasingly they're core to the business. So it's not something you just like bring the person in anymore. It actually entails working with all the constituencies that a CEO has to engage with. So, of course, employees and shareholders and business heads, et cetera. So the discussion today, I'm sorry to be a little bit long-winded, is about how, David's looking at me like, come on, is about how you guys at all of your companies are changing and engaging with your constituents with regard to these historically non-core issues that all of a sudden have become very, very core. And with that, I want to turn to the chief executives, and maybe David, start with you and ask you, so with all these types of things to choose from, say diversity, inclusiveness, all those things I talked about, never mind technology, how do you choose which ones to focus on with regard to Goldman Sachs? And are they things that you're interested in personally, or do they speak to the line business of Goldman?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here with all the other panelists. You listed a bunch, every single topic that you listed are things that we're focused on at Goldman Sachs. We're focused on them because they're relevant to Goldman Sachs, they're relevant to our clients, they're relevant to our shareholders, they're relevant to our employees. And so I don't think you have the luxury of picking and choosing. I think these organizations that we all run are big, complex global platforms. And as you're involved and engaged in big, complex global platforms, you have to have a system, for appropriately addressing, working on, making progress on all these issues. I think one of the biggest evolutions for me, just personally, in making the transition, I'm a new CEO, only 7 months, is I've always thought about perfection in the context of everything I've done. Now I think much more about progress. So, how are you making progress on these issues as opposed to perfection? But I think they're issues that we all have to wrestle with.
Bob, let me go over to you. Obviously, your business is about content creation to a great degree. You have audiences out there that are global, that are diverse. Does that mean that's sort of a key area for you to focus on?
Yeah, sure. Look, I look at the role of CEO as leading a company through what is clearly, a changing marketplace. As you point out, we do that on a global basis. And, in that role, you certainly need to have a plan. You need to have priorities. Part of that gets to making sure you can execute well. And part of executing well goes to the culture of the company, which, is really core for not only attracting employees, but retaining them and having them do their best work. And so in that regard, we have a set of priorities. And many of them actually trace back to our audiences. We've long been, yes, a content creation company, but really one that is passionate about the audiences we serve, be them children, be them young adults, be them adults all around the world. And we think we're able to do our best work when our company mirrors those audiences. So from a composition standpoint. So things like diversity and inclusion, whether that's related to gender, whether that's related to visual diversity, whether that's related to other forms of diversity, is very important to us and a priority. And again, it feeds this culture which allows people to do their best work and, quite frankly, stay and grow at our company in a world where there's a lot of opportunity.
Barbara, I want to turn it over to you. So Siemens, working with industrial customers, and I think, for instance, about oil and gas with you guys, a lot of different types of businesses that you touch. And so perhaps climate change and sustainability are critical to what you guys are doing?
You're absolutely right. You know, Siemens is a company that has built its business strategy around global megatrends. If you think about climate change, you think about the urbanization of the globe, the aging demographics of people, the ever interconnected global supply chain, and the digitalization of everything. These are the things that we bring our know-how to work to solve every single day. And so I'd echo Bob's comment about alignment, getting the cultural alignment, knowing that we're building a workforce that is dedicated to solving these problems. Those are the topics that we need to speak up about. So you'll hear us talking a lot as Siemens about sustainability goals, a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030 and all the progress we're making toward that. But maybe the most important area right now for us to speak up on is workforce development. Here in the US, we have record low unemployment. So getting involved in activities like the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board, using our voice to help find ways to create new pathways and generate opportunity for Americans. These are things that, you know, any CEO would be proud to support.
Great. And Carmine, you guys are in the people business in a big way. I mean, you have a giant global workforce. And I was just delighted to hear backstage when we were talking that you are giving your employees the whole week of 4th of July off. Wow. I want to go work for EY. That's awesome. but how can you do that? How can you do that? I mean, doesn't that kill your P&L?
No. So first of all, thanks for having me here, Andy. You know, today, the average age of one of our employees is 27 and a half years old. So to David's point, the millennials, that is basically our employee base. And so we have to really figure out ways to make sure that they're interested, they're doing interesting work, they're progressing, and they're learning. Those are incredibly important. So we've done all the math, and the cost to us, and this is only in the US, we're not giving 4th of July off in Great Britain or something like that. But,
yeah, they don't like that. It's not a holiday for them.
No, but it is something that we've done all the math, and the math works. You know, one of the things, you know, when you go into professional services or you go into financial services or probably a lot of the industries up here, people work hard, and they work hard most of the year. So this was really a little giveaway that has a long, long way to go. We have 270,000 people globally in over 150 countries. So we talk about a complicated platform. It's a complicated platform. But what's even more important, and I think it's going to be more important going forward, is culture, as Barbara said, because all of us, we were you know, joking around backstage. We're all like clients of one another. We all have to work with one another. And having that type of culture going forward is incredibly important, because as we move forward, the definition of a company or a corporation is going to get much more vague with a global ecosystem and everyone working together, joint ventures. It's there already. It's only going to be more.
And Jeff, I want to talk to you about your unique perspective, because first of all, you're running a food company, which is awesome. 150-year-old business, and you've worked there for decades. Which is different maybe from, well, some of you worked at companies, or your company's a long time. But in any event, I want to ask you sort of how the CEO role has changed since you've sort of had that perspective as you've moved up through the company. And obviously, you know, food, that business has just been roiled over the past decade.
Yeah, so it's really an honor to be able to be here, but also to be able to lead one of America's best food companies, longest live food companies. So it started on the banks of the Mississippi River in 1866. And what's interesting is to be able to lead a company that is 150 years old and probably the greatest change we're seeing in the food landscape in quite some time. And you know, we talk to our employees a lot. We've been around 150 years because we've been willing to change, not because we haven't. And now as we think about the change, I would say first it comes in the form of consumer food values and how those food values have changed. 20 years ago, General Mills was not in the natural and organic food business. Now we're the second largest in the country. 18 months ago, we were not in the pet food business. Now we're the largest natural pet food producer in the U.S. So that's changed. What's also changed is the focus on climate. And the food industry contributes a lot to climate change. And so General Mills is really involved in a lot of sustainable agricultural practices, things like regenerative agriculture, which we're really proud of, which we're really going to need in order to prevent climate change. And then finally what's changed is really demands on inclusiveness. And General Mills has always fostered a culture of belonging that's never more important than it is right now. So in 2012, General Mills supported gay marriage in Minneapolis. Very proud of what we have done there. 49% of our professionals are women. 40% of our officers are women. And so what we've seen is a real change in the workforce and the expectations, rightly so, on us as employers to represent the people that we serve.
So let me just follow up quickly on that gay marriage. How was that an issue that came to the fore at your company? I mean, why did you guys decide that was important?
Well, for us, we want to make sure that we're reflecting the people that we serve and our employee base. And we want all of our employees to come to General Mills feeling as if they can give their best, because when they give their best, then the company prospers and the people that we serve prosper. And so we have a large number of LGBT folks in our workforce, and we wanted to make sure that they knew they fit into General Mills as well as everybody else. And one of the things that's really interesting is that over the past year, General Mills has won awards from the military for how we've incorporated military people into General Mills, from the people of color network, from the LGBT. And so we've been able to develop this culture of belonging, I would say, that includes perspectives from a variety of different places, which has only served to make us better.
Great. David, I want to talk to you about technology. And you know, obviously, as I said at the beginning, it's something that's changing all of your businesses. Maybe yours the most, or at least as much as anyone else's. I mean, it's a lot.
Changing everybody's business.
Right. So how are you coping? I mean, and how are you keeping up personally? Talk about how the CEO's role has changed. You could spend all day getting updates from your team in terms of how technology is changing the capital markets, for instance. So how do you stay abreast, and how do you know when to make changes at Goldman and which businesses to get into and how to place your bets?
Well, I think anyone who's running a big company, the first thing you do is you've got to have great people and you've got to rely on your people. And so, when you talk about technology broadly across a platform like Goldman Sachs, we obviously use technology. A lot of our businesses actually operate on technology platforms. Our base market-making businesses for institutional clients used to be analog businesses, and they're now really platform businesses. The technology, the data that's available, the information, the way it's connected to clients, presented with clients, things everybody in the industry is spending a lot of time on. I think you have to invest. I think one of the big challenges and one of the reasons why in our business scale matters so much is the amount of capital that you need to spend to have the best technology, be in the best position to serve your clients, is increasing at a reasonable pace. I think you've got to pick the opportunities that you can focus on. We're all limited in terms of what we can invest in. It's no different than any other part of the strategy. What are your priorities? What are the returns that you'll get from those priorities over time? What's maintaining the institution, and what's investing in the future of the institution? And so, I think everyone uses a template that's relatively similar in terms of evaluating that, whether it's technology or it's entering, a new business that's adjacent to one of your businesses.
But if you look at things like, say, robo-advisors and passive investing and those things which are aided by technology to a great degree, do you see them as disrupting your business, and then do you have to directly respond to them? Well,
disrupting has a very strong, connotation to it. I would say that they're evolving the business, for sure. And so, the evolution of passive products, robo-advisors, et cetera, those are big businesses. Those businesses are going to continue to grow. But We run a very, very large active asset management platform. We've been focused on being an active, full-service global advisor in the asset management business. We are adding, some platforms that are more technology-driven, especially as we broaden out to try to serve consumers more broadly, which is relatively new for Goldman Sachs. But it's an evolutionary change, and these changes take generally longer than people think.
Barbara, do you feel technology anxiety in your role? I mean, do you feel this, that you have to keep up, and do you sometimes feel that you're getting, behind and you need to rely on your team to keep you abreast all the time?
It's interesting you would ask the question that way because the answer is no. I'm a natural optimist, so I tend to look and see what's happening and see the opportunity that's ahead of all of our folks. So not only for our own operations, bringing digital and bringing new technologies into our own operation, but now turning around and serving our customers who are all going through some kind of digital disruption in each one of their businesses. You see, Siemens has been around for over 170 years and always focused on bringing electrification and automation to the world. And so here we are on the brink of being able to bring digital and data to subjects that have been largely driven by analog processes, sort of decades-long planning. I think that we're about to that point where you could apply Moore's law to infrastructure because we now have access to data and things can change very rapidly. So about a decade or more ago, Siemens actually made their first big software purchase and started to build a capability in product lifecycle management, creating digital twins for our customers. And we're now one of the top 10 software companies in the world. It's quite a transformation. The key thing people keep asking me at this stage is, does this mean that robots will be taking over our jobs? And the answer is very clearly no. Where we're headed is actually elevating the role of the human. Where we're going is actually just expanding what's humanly possible. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be here.
Well, following up on that automation point, though, I mean, no doubt automation is causing job losses. And so you're in that business. Does that concern you? And are you also in the business of helping people who are maybe losing jobs because of automation?
Jobs are changing, that's for darn sure, right? And so we're doing things like apprenticeships that are bringing the experience of the hands-on manufacturing capabilities with the mechatronics courses that community colleges can offer so that our workforce, if they take the initiative, if they have the curiosity, they can actually get on that road. Every employee is offered the chance through our learning campus to do a digital readiness check. It just is a sort of rubric to help you understand where are you on the digital journey, and then it gives suggestions about the kinds of coursework or experiences that could help close those gaps. So the opportunities are around us. We're using actually the resources of the Siemens Foundation to make these capabilities available within industry writ large so that it's not just about us, right? This is about helping our customers, helping our communities build the skills that are needed for the future.
Great. Did you want to jump in?
No, I thought it was interesting.
I'm glad you were paying attention.
I was paying attention.
Just making sure. That's
I
good.
was
Very
wide,
good.
wide awake.
That's active listening.
Wide awake.
Thank you.
Bob, I want to talk to you about this content creation business because, man, it's never been more fraught in many ways. And what I'm, I guess, alluding to is polarization in our society and different political views. And you've got, let's face it, wild and woolly people making things for Nickelodeon, MTV, VH1, and all of a sudden you've got some, headache because someone's out there saying something on one of your shows. Never, I bet, every day. So how do you rein that in? I mean, on the one hand, it's a strength, right, to have creative people, of course, but to have them sort of pushing the limits is what I mean. On the other hand, it can go too far. And how do you sort of balance that?
Well, look, at the core, as you said, we're a creative content company, and we need to have people, whether they're our employees or partners we work with, bringing their best self to work and creating the best product. And so, that by definition requires a fairly loose rope with respect to seeing ideas and content come to life. And by the way, I do get emails on a regular basis from people complaining about something someone did. I got a bunch of emails about something Trevor Noah said last week. And you know, the first time you get those, they're kind of jarring. But at the end of the day, you know, people are choosing what content to watch. They don't have to watch our content. And so we think it's appropriate that there's different opinions on air or online or whatever the medium is. That said, we also, you know, have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to protect our employees and ensure their safety. And we have broader responsibility reflecting our audiences, and it's why we're active in many issues that are important, whether that's bullying or obesity in the form of children. And there was a case a couple years ago where there was a particular piece of content that was made that depicted something that we thought was risky, particularly in some places outside the US. And we made a very unusual decision to limit the access to that because we didn't want to put our employees at risk. But that is a very long tail probability thing. In general, look, you never know where the next hit is going to be. That's sort of like the magic of the entertainment building. One of our competitors, you know, has a film that did $1.2 billion in the last few days, and I think everyone thought it would be a big movie, but that's a really big movie. And last year we had a film called Quiet Place, which was a very inexpensive movie to make. I had great talent in the form of John Krasinski and his wife Emily Blunt in it, but it caught something on people, and it turned out to be a much bigger movie than we thought. And you know, that was just a cool, creative idea that someone came up with that we executed well against. So you don't want to keep it too tight.
You're right.
You know, you have to let stuff flourish, and you have to recognize that not everyone's going to like it. And by the way, lastly, in this social media-infused world, which, by the way, is what I think is really driving all the polarization, because theoretically, it lets everyone have a voice, but in reality, the only voices that cut through are the extreme voices, and they drown out everything else, and that's a problem, I think. But net-net, you're going to hear about the stuff you're doing, good, bad, or not indifferent. You're going to hear the good or the bad.
Just to follow up, so do you have mandates that come from your office in terms of, hey, why don't you guys create some content about bullying, or let's make sure that your shows have this much diversity, or let's make sure our slate of movies has this, these different types of people in it?
We certainly don't have mandates coming from my office on that. As a CEO, I believe you can only do a couple things. You can set a vision and a strategy, you can build a management team, and then you can watch the execution. And yeah, you can go call on clients from time to time or do something else, but at the core, that's not what you're doing, because you can't, not in a globe-spanning business. And so when you're setting a strategy, you're setting values, and things like the importance of culture, the importance of diversity and inclusion, that you can do. But you don't go mandate, okay, there's half a dozen films have to do this, or these TV shows have to do that. No, you're building a management team, and your management team is executing. And if they're successful, they'll get more responsibility. And if they're unsuccessful, you'll make some changes and keep going. That's really the way you execute, because you have to rely on your team. There's no other way to do it.
Great. Okay, Carmen, I want to ask you about a blockchain initiative that you guys have. And, you know, a lot of people have been running away from blockchain recently, or at least, you know, Bitcoin and crypto. And I know they're different, so don't tweet at me. But so why are you guys doing that?
Yeah, so Andy, so we started about 3 years ago. We hired our global head of innovation, and we put him in a group that reported to myself and Mark Weinberger, separate from our business. He's in Silicon Valley as a small group. And his job really was to come in and look at emerging technologies on the one hand, and also look to see how we can be disrupted. And I'll give you an example. When he first came in, the first thing he said is, well, the one area that EY operates in that can very easily be disrupted is tax. Because tax is all about data and technology, if you really look at it. And so, you know, to one of the points that was made earlier, we've invested heavily in data and technology around tax. It's something that we're doing more and more for our clients. And in this world of you have to focus on things that you're good at and whatever your core, most of our clients are not core at tax, so we're doing more and more of their tax work. That's how things are evolving. When you come to these emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, like blockchain, his group also started making sure that we were looking at these technologies in terms of how it can work on how we serve clients. And then we were able to distribute it through our organization. So blockchain is an example, and is, outside of crypto and so forth, but the distributed ledger.
Right.
We've been doing several projects around the world around, and this gets to General Mills, around authenticating wine and or food in terms of the entire supply chain. From wine would be an example. We've done 3 or 4 of these projects in Italy. We're doing a project in Japan around sake, that basically when you buy a bottle of wine, using blockchain, it could be tracked and traced all the way back to the grapes and the vineyard and so forth. And these are, that's a technology that, in my view, should be utilized much more broadly in terms of really authenticating what kind of food or drink or whatever it is. So we're doing a lot. That's one example. AI is another example where, we're creating artificial intelligence to be able to read contracts. So in so much of what we do, whether it's an audit or consulting work or whatever, we have to read a contract. So we're using, natural language processing and so forth to really be able to do that much faster, much more holistically. And we talk about disruption, and as David said, I don't think it's going to be disrupted like that, but over time, that will evolve. So we're very excited about how that's changing our business. And you might say, is that taking away jobs even from us? And it's not. What it's doing is really having our people do more interesting things at a younger level, which hopefully will enable us to retain our people more than in the past. That's the game.
All right, you got your blockchain on?
Got my blockchain on.
Okay, good.
Fully on.
You got to have your blockchain on, because I want to really drill down a little bit into your business, because, as I said, it has been ugly, not necessarily for you so much as, the Kraft Heinz's, the Campbell Soups. What is going on in the food business, Jeff? What's going on?
Well, I think the first thing I would say, there's a lot of change with regard to consumer food values, and so you see that people want fewer ingredients they can pronounce, no artificial colors and flavors, and so you really have a choice. And I'm like you, I am an optimist, but I think if you're going to be involved in a world of change, then you need to change yourselves. And so at General Mills, we've changed our product portfolio, but we've also changed the products within our portfolio. And for example, all of our cereals have no artificial colors or flavors or preservatives. And so we made that change, and a lot of people were really happy with that. But we started hearing from consumers about Trix cereal, and some of them were really happy, and some of them were really upset because they like their Trix.
Like
Trix
the
cereal,
Trix are for kids?
like silly rabbit Trix are for kids.
Yeah.
Rabbit, yeah.
And so half the people said, hey, we think you're the smartest people ever for taking the artificial colors and flavors out. And some people, we think you're the dumbest guys ever for doing that. And so now we have a couple of varieties of Trix, one that has no artificial colors and flavors, and one looks like the Trix that they know and love. And so that gets back to this idea of choice. And
how did that work out for, because that's another SKU, right?
That's another SKU.
And you get more shelf. Does it work out from a business standpoint?
It's worked out great from a business standpoint because we've given people what they want.
Right.
People want no artificial colors and flavors. They're buying more Trix. The people who realize how much they like the original, they like it. And so as we navigate this time of change, and you talked about it, one is the first thing and most important thing for us is, with so much swirling around, making sure we keep our eye clearly focused on consumers and what they want. Because when we give them what they want, we never lose. But when we get confused about other voices going on in the environment, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. And some people want natural and organic, and some people want unicorn-shaped marshmallows and Lucky Charms. And sometimes they want the organic in the morning, and they want the unicorn marshmallows and Lucky Charms in the afternoon.
I'm processing that. Yeah, it makes sense to me. But I mean, again, I hope that it works out for the business. You could see giving people what they want, but you're increasing costs. So there's got to be some rationalization involved.
Well, and you mentioned blockchain. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to know where their food comes from, and so. With Annie's, we've developed some products where we can trace it all the way back to the individual farmer with the farmer's name on the box on what they're looking for. Some people, that's not important to them at all, but for some people, it's really important. The same with things like regenerative agriculture. And we've lost about half of our topsoil here in the U.S. in the last 50 years, and we're going to lose the other half if we don't do something different. For some consumers, they don't care a lot about that, but we need to.
Right.
We need to care about that because we depend on the earth for our livelihood. And so we've invested in regenerative agriculture practices and have very specific commitments to generate 1 million square acres of regenerative habitat over the next 10 years.
Cool. David, I want to switch over to you and ask you about your time in Washington recently, in the hot seat with the other bank CEOs and facing down those members of Congress. I mean, what is that like? How do you prepare? What is that like? I mean, and the reason this is relevant is because, you know, you could say this comes with the territory now increasingly if you're a chief executive, being more public and explaining the business in the most public forum imaginable. What is that like?
Well, it was a different experience. First time experience for me. My guess is it won't be the last. But just at a high level, I'd say, look, the transparency, this is part of the responsibility we have as leaders running big companies that have big platforms that are influential. The transparency is important for society, for the communities we operate in, and this is part of the process. I certainly spent a bunch of time preparing. I would say at the end of the day, I prepared more than I needed to, but I'm a big believer in be prepared. But it's a natural part of the process. It's a responsibility. I think sitting in one room, you know, talking for 7 or 8 hours, you know, with 2 short bathroom breaks is a long day for anybody. But generally speaking, I think we as, you know, leaders on our platforms have a responsibility to be transparent about what we're doing, why, how it impacts what we do that's good and beneficial to the communities we operate in. And, you know, I welcome that opportunity to participate that way.
How'd you feel afterwards? How'd you feel that you did?
I was glad when the day was over and we moved on to the next day. But it, you know, it's a natural part of the process. And look, one of the things I know all the people on this panel will share, the visibility of running these organizations and what comes with it, and the way you're scrutinized is important but fair.
Right. Anyone else here have to testify before Congress? Okay, not yet. You're alone in that camp then.
Well,
right.
you know.
I want to, Bob, ask you a little bit about another controversial subject, and that is the Me Too movement, which has hit your brother company, CBS, very, very hard. And what do you see as your role as a CEO to provide leadership when it comes to making sure that doesn't happen to Viacom when it did happen at CBS in a very big way?
Well, look, I think it goes to this topic of culture, you know, and ensuring that your employees, again, can bring their best self to work, be comfortable bringing ideas to the table, be comfortable being in the workplace. And so, you know, it goes to values. It goes to the construction of your management team. You know, our company is actually over 50% women in this particular area. We have more women on our board than virtually any other Fortune 500 company. You know, women very well represented in our senior ranks. But it's also, you know, we have open lines and all kinds of transparency, and if there's issues, we just encourage people to bring them to the table so we can sort them out. And, you know, knock on wood, we haven't had any massive issues. We've certainly have had issues that we had to work out. But I do think at the core, it goes to culture. And, you know, I think, you know, years ago, I used to be a management consultant, and, you know, we focused on business and all. And over time, you begin to appreciate really the importance of vision and really the importance of culture and this, you could say, softer side of things, but in reality, it is very linked to business performance. And it is the way you get the best out of employees. You know, when I took over of CEO of Viacom at the end of 2016, a pretty well-known fact was our culture was not in great shape. People were not happy. And it was a function of the preceding years, and also the fact that we had really once had a really great culture. And so one of my priorities coming in was to improve the culture. And that we went to work on by making sure our employees understood what we were trying to do. You know, it wasn't like we had a strategy and we kept it in the corner office. We rolled it out to the world. We rolled it out to our employees in town halls. We let them ask questions. We talked about how culture fit into that, how being focused on our audiences fit into that. And as a result of that, our culture has strengthened very dramatically. And we once again are, I'd like to think, a first choice place to work. And it goes to the full spectrum of issues, including Me Too.
Right. So let me ask you, I'm sure everyone is curious, what is the latest, Bob, with regard to a merger with CBS, Sherry Redstone? I know you can just talk very freely about all that right now in front of us. Why don't you tell us what's going on? Or maybe even talking to David about transactions. I don't know. Anything going on you can share with us?
Look, this is the third time this rumor mill has gone around, and the first and second time what I decided to do and what I told my teams to do is stay focused, keep executing against our plan, let's keep moving the company forward, because I don't know what's going to happen in that regard, but I know one thing for sure. At the end of the year, you're either going to be talking to me or you're going to be talking to somebody else. And what you don't want to say is, well, yeah, we were on track, but we got distracted and we didn't deliver. That'll be a bad meeting. So we'll focus on executing. We just, as a virtue of that or extension of that, we just completed an acquisition of the largest free streaming television service in the United States, Pluto TV. Yeah. That fills out our strategy of being able to serve the free price point, something we weren't able to do before in our product line. So we got people focused on that. We got people focused on, we're coming up to the upfront season where we'll probably transact, I don't know, $2 billion of ad business in the next 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. So we're focused on that. We just finished a big distribution deal with AT&T, and so we're focused on. So that's what we're focused on, and that has paid great dividends for our company over the last 2 years. It returned it to growth. People will get an update on that in our earnings call a week from Friday. As far as the other noise, there's always noise. There's always distractions. You got to play through and see where it goes.
All right. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Barbara, I want to ask you to drill down a little bit more with regard to climate change. Mm-hmm. And I think that you guys said you're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. The UN has set some very strict mandates, I think the same date as well. So what is your responsibility as the CEO of Siemens USA with regard to achieving that goal and to actually, well, let me ask this, do you have a role as a CEO to try to reach that goal for others outside of your company as well?
Great question. Yes, what does the CEO do? The CEO has a vision, the CEO sets a strategy, right? The CEO creates a team and makes sure it gets resourced and then makes decisions day to day of, how are we doing against this overall plan? So with a really bold goal of carbon neutrality, you can imagine all of the very detailed pieces that need to go into the day-to-day transactions. That isn't anything that I can influence in the first hand. Setting the goal, though, is critical. The team is off working on initiatives like what happens to our fleet of vehicles. If anyone sees a white van with the petrol Siemens logo on the side, that's most likely someone from our infrastructure team or maybe our mobility team, our healthcare team, huge fleets of vehicles that are carbon emitters. So we're big fans of what's going on in the electrification of mobility. But guess what? When mobility gets electrified and we change from fossil fuels into electricity, we need strong electrical infrastructure to be able to support that transition. We're making the transition, we're encouraging others to do the same, and that means we've got to be working with communities to get their power grids updated and get power to where the vehicles will be and where they'll need it. And then now look at the buildings. We have a fleet of buildings as well. And all of them are ripe for the kinds of energy efficiency things that can really make a big difference. But here's the secret. The secret is these things are great business propositions as well. In the cases where we've done the analysis of what does it take to make that transition, we're finding, yes, there is a near-term investment that needs to be made, but over the long term, after about the 5-year period, it just reaps rewards for the organization. So it's a great story of being able to talk to people about the positive effect on the balance sheet of making the kind of changes that are actually going to be the right things to do for sustainability.
Right. Carmen, I want to ask you a little bit about, maybe some of David's new acquaintances. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and also Elizabeth Warren and others are calling for new tax policies and looking at income and wealth inequality. And I want to know if this is something that you feel that is in your purview. I mean, tax is something that is close to what you do. And so is this something that you guys are pointed towards? Is it a business opportunity? How do you view that?
Well, we don't really think it's a business opportunity. It's probably more dangerous. But the real thought here is we were very involved in tax reform and corporate tax reform. And we do think that that has helped the economy in a big way. And it's something that I think hasn't been publicized as much as it should be. I do think we needed a corporate tax rate that was competitive with rates around the world. And we needed to make sure that capital came back into the U.S. or stayed in the U.S. So that's all been positive. It hasn't been received as positive, whether that's because of the way the media is or that there are other issues. But look, we have to figure out a way to deal with income inequality in the U.S. and around the world. And that's something that I truly believe is more focused around reskilling and education than almost anything else. But if it takes, that's going to take funding, and that's going to take funding probably from the government, but from all of our companies as well. And so we're all going to have to play a part here. But I do think income inequality is dangerous. It's something that we all need to work on. And we're trying to do our part, but it's an issue. It's an issue.
You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's an issue. I think the issue is more framed in opportunity, and I think that we have to, both as leaders of businesses and also from a government perspective, we have to be focused on broadening opportunity. I think education and training are two areas where there's lots of opportunity to do that. I think there'll be a lot of noise in the political process leading up to the election, on this topic. Our system's not perfect, but it's a really good system, and through the lens of any reasonable period of time, our system's brought a lot of people along. I think it'll continue to bring people along, but it's not perfect. And our job running private companies, also in partnership with government, is to figure out how we can all do more to create more opportunity for people broadly across the country. And that's something that I know that all of us sitting here are focused on as we prosecute our businesses, deal with our clients. We have responsibilities, but we also want to contribute to our communities in a very positive way.
Jeff, I want to shift gears and ask you a little bit about food and lobbying, Washington, and the goals that you have as a company. You guys, have Annie's pasta and it really have made a lot of strides towards providing healthier foods for the American public and for the public around the world. At the same time, lobbying groups in Washington that you might be a part of might not match the same goals that you guys have at your company. How do you, because they might be pushing against regulations that your company might be for, but you're part of an overall group. So how do you reconcile that kind of disconnect?
Well, for the food industry, first I would say a couple of things. That the smart regulation is actually really good for us. And so, to the extent that, our organic business really took off once we had national legislation on the definition of organic. The same would be true of natural and pet food. And so the first thing I would tell you is that as a food company, it's not as if we're against all regulation. What we really need to do to have smart regulation and a uniform regulation. The regulation that we really can't live with is state-by-state regulation. Because if we're not careful, then we become the United States of Europe, where we have a different platform in California than we do in Vermont, than we do in Washington, than we do in Minnesota. And so the key for us is to make sure that we have, well, this microphone's kind of working, so that we have regulation that is national and not state by state, because that's really bad for commerce and drives up cost. But when it comes to having legislation that's national, I think there are a lot of different paths that can work out.
Great. David, I want to go back to talk to you a little bit about leadership and authenticity and communication. We were talking about this backstage a little bit. And I noticed I don't think too many of you all are on Twitter. For instance, are you? Any Twitter people here? No. You are. Okay. All right, we'll get back to you. David, you're not on Twitter. You choose to be on Instagram.
I'm on Twitter. I don't tweet.
But you're on Twitter, but you don't tweet. That's tantamount to not being on Twitter. Not really on Twitter.
I don't
that
know.
doesn't count.
Sometimes
Right.
saying less is better than saying more.
Yes, I hear you. So why did you pick Instagram, and talk to us about that decision?
Well, for starters, my predecessor Lloyd was a big user of Twitter, and he's a lot funnier than I am. And look, these are communication strategies. I think one of the things we all think about is we all have different ways to communicate. We have to communicate with our people. We have to communicate with our shareholders. We have to communicate with our clients. We have to communicate with the world broadly who's watching what we're doing and what our businesses are doing. I think Instagram, for us, was an interesting platform to communicate first and foremost to our people. And I think Goldman Sachs, when you step back and you think about what Goldman Sachs is, we're a collection of people. We have 38,000 employees all over the world. It's a people business. We have people dealing with clients every day. And I needed a more modern way to communicate to a workforce that's 75% millennial, that's 60% 30 years old or less, similar to some of the characteristics that were described at the other end earlier. And this seemed like a new way to kind of evolve the communication. And candidly, the feedback's been pretty good. But we're thinking about lots of different ways that we can communicate. Some of it's on platforms like this, but others, I think one of the things in the world we live in is the visibility of a leader in a role to be connected to your clients, to your people in a more authentic way. That's been a real change. CEOs don't sit up in an ivory tower anymore, isolated. And if you do, by the way, it's going to be a very unsuccessful way, I think, to lead your organization. And so you've got to be a little bit more available, a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more human, and you've got to be in touch. And I think these tools can be helpful in doing that. I think there are flaws with the tools. Bob, talked about some of the flaws too, but they're here to stay, and our job is to use them as effectively as we can.
I want to come to Bob and talk about that, but the other thing that another way you put yourself out there, I should say, David, is you're a DJ, right? And so, you could, once you became CEO, you could have just stopped that, right? Now I'm the CEO, I don't DJ anymore, but you decided to continue it, right?
Well, if somebody became a CEO and they said, well, I'm going to stop playing golf, would that be, it's a hobby. It's something I do. I'm a human being. Yeah. Why would you ever ask somebody, we're going to stop playing golf now that you're CEO? So it's something I do. I enjoy it. And, I'm obviously very focused on Goldman Sachs, but I think all of us, to be a successful leader, you have to work very hard. You have to be very committed to your business, but you've got to be a human being, and we all have interests. We have to live our lives, and this is just a part of my life, and it so happened that that's the way it played out.
And there are charity events that you do these things for sometimes?
I have the good fortune of the fact that I probably get to do more of it than I deserve, given my talent level. So if I can do that, and raise money for charities, right. I've created a foundation, a record label to raise money for addiction charities, and I'm trying to find a way to take something that was a hobby, right. but to use the good fortune I have in my position to do some good and find other ways to give back.
Next party. Bob's thinking about that. So did you have some...
I think it'd be awesome at a party.
Did you have some thoughts about social media and communication?
Well, look, I think communications is really central to executing as a CEO. If you think about it, as I said, when we developed our plan for Viacom circa beginning of 17, the plan has no value unless you execute against it. Your ability to execute against it requires people to understand it, both your employees, your partners, et cetera. So from the beginning, we were focused on communications, and we are today. We use a whole range of platforms and approaches. I think the important part is you have to have a synchronized set of messages, and then you have to deploy them. So, for example, we use Facebook Live on a quarterly basis to talk to our employees all around the world, take questions, et cetera. We've recently been using LinkedIn. Why do we use LinkedIn? Because we recruit people, and there's a lot of people on LinkedIn, and we think that's an effective tool. Obviously, we speak at places, but because I believe it's so centrally important that people understand what you're trying to do. So they, again, if they're an employee, they can bring your best work. If they're a partner, they can say, hey, we want to talk to you about X. And social media certainly fills into that as well.
So those companies, Facebook in particular, Google, they also compete with your core business in a way, sure. right? Should they be reined in? Should they need to be regulated more, broken up?
Look, in general, we like free market economies. If there is regulation, we like consistency of regulation. So for example, if you look at the ad business in the UK, what you have is inconsistency of regulation where television platforms are regulated against HFSS, high-fat, salty snacks, and internet platforms are not. And it's fair to say that there's plenty of young audience on internet platforms and people advertising to them. Our brands on those platforms, we self-police, and we basically mirror our policies on television. But that's an example where it's probably good to have some regulation, but you should have consistent regulation, in this case, across platforms.
Great. Okay, let's talk about you and Twitter, Barbara. When did you get on Twitter? And have you been tweeting back to President Trump on trade policy? Is that something you do?
I'm not doing that. Let's reference question number one. What is it important for CEOs to talk about, right? And so I agree with David and Bob. This is an absolutely essential element of our communication portfolio. I think there are two things that I actually focus on here. One is I actually just want people to see what I see. I have the privilege of going out and visiting our customers, talking to our employees, meeting with universities who are collaborating with us on the future. I want to be able to share that with others. That's important. But the second thing is there's still a lot of talk about women in leadership, and I don't mind putting myself out there and actually being vulnerable, sharing with people that I never thought this was going to be my path. And I'm getting this incredible response from others who are saying, wow, your story is so much like what I'm going through right now. Do you have any advice for me? So if I can use my voice to encourage people who wouldn't otherwise bring their whole selves to work to get engaged, I want to use it.
Great. Jeff, you got a microphone.
I have two. Whoa.
You have a voice.
This is going to be a little dangerous.
Yourself too loud.
Right. Okay, easy. What about you in terms of putting your personality out there and communicating on an almost personal level, the way Barbara was talking? Do you feel the urge or need to do that?
Yeah, I think the two keys to communication are really, not really what platform you're on, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or what have you, but it's really, are you authentic? And is your message clear and consistent? Mm-hmm. And what's different about the world today is that 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, you could have a different message for investors or for people who are interested in the environment or for your employees or for a conference like this. And so at every different place you go, because there wasn't social media available, you could have a different message everywhere, and it didn't matter because people wouldn't hear that. Now, when I come to this conference or I go and talk to a forum about regenerative agriculture, or I go and talk to our investors, our employees, the message has to be clear and has to be the same. But it also has to be delivered in a voice that's going to be uniquely my own. And so, my guess is the panel up here, there are a lot of similarities among the people up here, but I guess there are a lot of differences. I don't DJ.
Yeah.
If I tried to pull that off, it would go very poorly.
Right.
And so I think for me the key is not where you interact, but how you interact, and the fact that your communication needs to be consistent.
Barbara, let me go back to you because I wanted to follow up. You mentioned the American Workforce Board that you're on. Talk about that just briefly, and then also that means that you're interfacing with the administration.
Yes.
And so, boy, that seems like it would be all upside, but is there downside too? And how do you navigate that?
Think about it. Is there any subject more important right now? Is there any subject that has stronger bipartisan support than the idea that putting people to work, right, is something that we ought to be doing? It's a real privilege to have a chance to work on this board, and the board has some very straightforward goals. What we're trying to do is identify pathways to success beyond a 4-year degree. We're trying to find ways to connect the workforce with the opportunities across the country, and we're also then trying to help encourage and help people understand that investments in businesses training their workforce actually pays a great dividend. So if you think about all of those aspects, there's no downside in supporting. So Secretary Ross and Ivanka Trump have chartered the Workforce Policy Advisory Board, and we're meeting together as a group. And in fact, we've just had a meeting here at Milken, thanks to Mike Pivovar, who has been co-chair of one of our subcommittees with me. And such a constructive way to advance really important policies with business, with education, with labor, with local and state government stakeholders at the table. This is something that is vitally important.
And some of the CEOs on the panel besides yourself include?
Tim Apple, you may have heard of.
Tim Apple.
Maryland Lockheed,
Yeah,
you may have heard
right.
of as well. I mean, everybody
That's
had
very funny.
seen
Very
the
good.
social media uptake of the first meeting of our board because Tim Cook actually, was making some very important announcements. But Ginny Rometty, we've
Right.
got Visa at the table, Walmart, Home Depot.
Great.
From a company perspective, it's a great panel.
And Carmen, I want to ask you finally about your Entrepreneur of the Year award process. And the reason I do that, number one, that's really the lifeblood of the U.S. economy. And number two, I think it's been pretty successful in terms of having a big public-facing program that draws in your customers, you get free publicity. It's a kind of a novel idea. Do you want to talk about that and tell us how it's worked out for you guys?
Yeah, this actually started over 30 years ago, and a lot of people think it started in Silicon Valley. It actually started in Wisconsin, which was the first one that we had. And so we run an Entrepreneur of the Year competition, really, in about 55 countries around the world. The US, we have our, we do it by region and by industry, and then eventually we pick one US winner. Same way we pick one Brazilian winner and so forth. And it's really all around, not only, you have to have a company that's doing well, that's entrepreneurial and so forth, but more and more, we really want companies that have a purpose, that are doing good for the world and so forth. So you kind of have to have both sides of this. And then in June, we pick one overall winner, our Entrepreneur of the Year globally in Monte Carlo, and it's a big deal. Now these work great for us because at all these events, we have larger corporates along with startups and entrepreneurial companies, and we're doing more and more of that because there's learnings on both sides, and our larger clients appreciate it, and the startups appreciate it. So very excited about it. We get some great clients and great companies from it.
Monte Carlo.
Monte Carlo, yes, that's
It's not exactly Wisconsin.
Could be a booking
No.
for you, David.
Probably not.
What was that?
All right, you know what? We are out of time. But I thought this was really, really cool. And so please join me in thanking David, Barbara, Jeff, Carmine, and Bob. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.